I finally got enough sculptures from my gold keys and from the daily special offer to expertise Ragnar Lodbrok. So in this video, I'm going to talk about who should and should not invest in this commander, and I'll show you the test results with a fully museum relict Ragnar. Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and today's video is sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms. And when we compare Ragnar's power level to the sorts of commanders you can get in the Season of Conquest, let's be real, he's just not quite there. However, I wanted to see exactly how good his kit was because, I had bought a bunch of his daily special offer anyways, and I got a bunch of them from Gold Keys, and I took him all the way to expertising. But not only did I expertise him, but when you enter into the Season of Conquest, you get this thing called the Museum, and you can get some additional buffs from the Museum. I went and I did this, 20% defense and 10% normal attack damage taken reduction from Ragnar Lodbrok. And so I tested him in Ark of Osiris with War Daddy Chad to see how he would do. So in this video, I want to do a couple things. First, I want to remind you of his kit, why it is that you might consider investing in Ragnar, and then I'm going to take you to the test results so you can see for yourself how he does in the end game when compared to the commanders there. And I'm just going to spoil this a little bit up front, which is to say that Ragnar probably does some cool things in the early game, but by the time you get to the end game, his punch is a little bit lacking, but he did still hold up okay, not amazing in the end game. I know that's not the most glowing endorsement exactly, but let's review his kit to talk about the situations where he would be best. Because really, Ragnar is a strange one-trick pony. The one thing he does is his active skill, Power of the King. Troops led by this commander deal 40% increased damage and take 20% reduced damage for 5 seconds. That's a 60% damage swing in total for 5 seconds. So the goal with this commander, much like I did in the past with Julius Caesar, was to try to pair him with someone such that by the time the active skill came back around of the primary commander all over again, you'd want Ragnar's buff over here to still be active. And I don't know that leadership sort of equipment is a great investment right now, especially compared to just going for cavalry talented equipment and infantry talented equipment and archer talented equipment. So for those reasons, I wanted to find a way to try to use him as the secondary commander. Obviously, if you use him as a primary commander, then you guarantee, boom, you're going to hit him with some big skill cycle damage from your secondary commander. In fact, if you did, for some reason, use a Ragnar primary and a Joan of Arc prime secondary commander, and this is like some end game stuff, okay? But if you did do that, yeah, you would do a lot of damage, but anybody you pair with Joan, you're going to do a lot of damage, right? So if we get a look back at the rest of Ragnar's kit, I think this is the issue with Ragnar on the whole, that the rest of his kit isn't quite there to hold up in the endgame meta, even with that museum buff of 10% less normal attack damage taken and 20% defense on his second skill. He has 20% attack and a 10% chance to reduce the target's healing effects by 40% for 3 seconds. This is nice, but it's really not enough and doesn't really do much for you in the end game. Even though there's lots of situations where healing does happen, it's just not very meaningful. And if we look at the next spot over here, the Horns Call, troops led by this commander deal 10% increased damage when attacking cities. Well, look, the main thing you care about in the end game is open field fighting effectiveness. I will show you a little bit of a city test with Ragnar compared to using someone like Mehmed, and he's not as good as Mehmed, and that's not all that surprising, right? Last skill says troop capacity is increased by 10%, and when this commander launches a rally troops gain 10% increased troop capacity, but this is only against cities. So it's 10% troop cap in the open field. That's fine. But that's his whole kit. That's everything. The whole kit and caboodle. If we just very briefly compare to a commander like Julius Caesar, you can see why I have been saying I would expect him to perform like Julius Caesar. Because Julius, okay, he does for 5 seconds. He'll do 400 damage factor. He'll also make it so you get 20% defense, 20% attack, and 30% increased damage. So really, we're talking about a trade-off of 10% increased damage and 20% reduced damage taken as the difference in Ragnar. And over here, you're getting some stats, right? Julius Caesar also gets really, really tanky, reducing the damage that you take, and that gets even better when you get swarmed. And Julius Caesar has 5% more troop capacity, so his troop capacity is better as well. Now, if you were for some reason to use Ragnar as the primary, the talents that you'd want to use for fighting in the open field will be all the way up here to get strategic prowess. I definitely, if you could swing the mixed troops, you would go for armored to the teeth and armed to the teeth because that's really good. You'd really want to get effortless and also fight to the death. These are really important talents. I also really like armored joints, reducing the damage that you take. And if you had extra talent points, I suppose you could go and get buckler shield as well. I find that generally up over here, close formation's just okay. And this point over here is really all about rallying. And in general, I feel like the leadership tree could use a lot of love because it sort of designed for mixed trooped rallies, which very, very, very quickly became not meta in this game. So because that's really not meta, just leadership in general is not optimal for, I think, what it's kitted out originally to do. But that said, could we find some pairings that were really powerful? And there's a couple that I wanted to try. One thing I want to say is, look, if you want to have the active skill of Ragnar available on your primary commander when the skill cycle turns back around again, so you use Ragnar as the secondary and you hope that this is still active, then you got to use somebody either who has a lower rage requirement. So for that reason, we did a bunch of testing with XY primary. Or what you need to do is you need to have other commanders nearby that generate a lot of rage, like Trajan or with Joan. But for the sake of this testing, we ran an XY primary, and then we ran a Ragnar secondary. I also did a little bit of testing because I thought maybe I could generate enough rage, maybe. If I used Skippy Prime, who's right over here, I ran him as the primary, and then I ran Ragnar as the secondary. So that was the majority of what I did for the testing here. And just to give you a sense of what gear I used in those cases, on the Skippy primary, I actually used my fully crit infantry set, which is just completely insane. So that's what I was running here. It's the best gear you could have actually in the game for infantry, in my opinion, especially for the dueling here. And then on my XY, I had gear that looked like this over here. Mostly iconic, missing crits and iconic on both the horn and the ring. So pretty dang good set of gear. And I'll put War Daddy Chad, who was my sparring partner for this exercise, his equipment up on the screen. We wanted to test against a couple of things. We wanted to test against his archers. We wanted to test against some infantry. And we also wanted to test against some cavalry. We both removed our city themes and used a 5% defense token and cleared out our commander tab as well to try to make things as even as possible. That said, I am the Ottoman civilization. He is Germany. That is somewhat relevant for this test, but not a complete game changer. The first test we ran was my XY with Ragnar paired against Boudica with Esong. And I thought Boudica with Esong is really important to be able to beat. I'm running cavalry. I mean, if I can't beat the Boudica Esong, we got problems. And I got bad news here as I didn't beat the Boudica Esong. Now, that said, this result is pretty close. And considering that you could have worked on Ragnar before you even get to Season of Conquest, I mean, I suppose this is a somewhat remarkable result that he did okay. But keep in mind that War Daddy Chad here doesn't have quite as good equipment as I do on my XY as well. So we were really hoping to win and to win by more. We ran the test again, and this time I did win the trade, but still lost the fight. So I had 40,000 Sev wounds to his 42,000 Sev wounds. We ran this a third time, and it's 41,200 Sev wounds to 37,900. So I lost this trade and lost the fight. We are running, by the way, 25% expansions. Part of the reason that I wanted to do that is I wanted to diminish the effect of the extra troop capacity. And let me explain that a little bit further. You'll notice my troop count is higher than War Daddy Chad's. Well, that's because Ragnar's 4th skill gives me more troop capacity. If I didn't fight with those extra troops, it would completely defeat the point of doing this testing at all, because I'm trying to show how much better Ragnar is in the open field. But I wanted to at least use a 25% expansion to offset the fact that if you were really fighting in KVK, you'd have a 50% expansion, you have Season of Conquest technology, which gives you more troop capacity, and that would overall diminish a little bit the value of those extra troops. That's just because the percentage boost you get overall of troops when you go from, 200 to 220,000 troops is a more meaningful impact than when you go from 280,000 to 300,000 troops. Although the 20k troops you get is the same in either case, the impact those 20k troops has much bigger impact when there are less total troops involved. Anyways, if we get a look at a couple other tests here, we then ran against his cavalry. And cavalry just, what would you expect against running a, expertise Nevsky Joan into XY Ragnar? We got 2 for 1, which is pretty brutal. Although, I don't know, this is one of the better open field combos in the game. The fact that XY Ragnar could hold up at all, I guess, is okay. We ran this again. I'm still getting wrecked. Look, I wanted this to be able to do something. It didn't do as much as I was hoping it would be able to do. We then ran against his Skippy Honda. His infantry gear is pretty solid. I would say, it's roughly equivalent to what I was using on my XY here. And I end up losing this by 20,000 Sev wounds as well. So Skippy Honda is a great combo, fine for dueling and great in the open field. In fact, this combo really is more about AoE damage than it is dueling. So the fact that we're losing to this is a pretty big sign that, unfortunately for Ragnar, he's really not quite there for the end game, okay? 44,000 to 27,000. We ran yet another test. This time I start to bring out Skippy with Ragnar, and, this doesn't generate quite as much rage, so it's hard to have that uptime of Ragnar's skills when Skippy's active skill comes back around. However, I battle the Boudica E-Song, and I did get a win here. And I was like, wait a minute, hello, I got a win. 35,000 to 48,000 almost, Sev wounds. We ran it again, and I did get another win. 35,000 to 42,000, 41,000. Okay, decent. But, I'm running cavalry against his archers, and his equipment's not as good. This is the best infantry equipment in the game that I'm running here. So, yeah, it was fine. Just for comparison, I then ran a Skippy Honda against the Boudica E-Song. This is full infantry. Okay, we're running full infantry into his archers. And, yeah, 27,000 to 44,000. So, as a comparison point, right? Like, I got a better trade with Honda, 27,000 Sevs to 44 versus the 5 to 47 just about. But honestly, the Skippy Ragnar did a little bit better than I would have thought, in part because my equipment is so good though, okay? And so then I said, okay, well, hold on. Let me run a Skippy Ragnar against your cavalry. And his Nevsky Joan kind of crushed me. 42,000 Sevs to 32,000 Sevs. So this kind of shows you that, like, yeah, I'm getting it to work, but I think that's just because Skippy is so good and my equipment for infantry is so good. More than that's telling us that, like, hey, wait a minute, there's a place for Ragnar. Obviously, I think that the Skippy with Ragnar performed better. A part of the reason that this works out is because the support tree is pretty good. Support tree doesn't really care about if your, secondary commander does a bunch of active skill damage or not, which works out perfectly for the Ragnar, and it generates some rage. So just to get a comparison point, I said, okay, well, what happens if I run Skippy with Caesar? I remembered Skippy Caesar being good. And this did worse, actually, than Ragnar did. 38,500 to 36,500 against the Boudica E-Song. So I thought, okay, maybe this is on par with the Caesar secondary. We tried a couple more things. The XY Caesar, 40,000 to 37,000. It's basically on par with Julius Caesar, which makes sense. The kit is about the same. So if you thought Julius Caesar was decent, then I would say Ragnar is also decent, but neither of them are meta in the endgame. I ran a Boudica with Ragnar just to kind of see how it would do, and it performed about the same yet again. 42,400 to 39,000, just about. I'm rounding up slightly. But remember, I'm winning on gear here, which is a big part of the reason I think I'm getting a better trade. Also, remember, I am the Ottoman civilization, so I have this special unit for archers. So not only do I have better gear, I also have the special unit and the civ bonuses. So, yeah, I would not say that's a glowing endorsement for the Boudica Ragnar combo. I ran a no equipment Nevsky Ragnar. He ran a no equipment Joan of Arc Nevsky. I don't know what you would have expected, but I just wanted to see, pair with someone like Nevsky who only does single target damage and how would it go? And it was about 38,400 to 22,600. Yeah, not too amazing. Okay, I suppose if I had leveled up Ragnar and put all the talents there, I could have used him as the primary. That might have been more interesting to see if, is there a world in which leadership equipment Ragnar could be a thing? But right now, it's hard to say the leadership equipment is sort of worth the invest. And the last thing we did, just for, I don't know, I would say it's for science, but we weren't all that scientific. Word Daddy Chad put a City Keeper Dragon Lancer on his wall. We were like, all right, what happens if I hit his city? And with the XY Ragnar, it was 115 or almost 114,000 sevs for me and 89,000 sevs for him. Then I used Mehmed, and I took 131,000 sevs, but I inflicted 139,000 sevs. This is not very scientific, but I just thought it was kind of interesting. The Mehmed did better. I would expect it to do better, but also, take this with a grain of salt. Word Daddy Chad didn't heal troops between these 2 rounds, so he has slightly less troops in his city, which could be relevant, but let's draw some conclusions here about Ragnar, shall we? For me, I think the main takeaway is that Ragnar does okay when you get to the endgame, but he's not amazing. And I don't know what I would have expected a commander to do when you get to the endgame. Assuredly, if I had tested with an epic, you'd see how much better he is than an epic, but to have expertise to Ragnar Lodbrok by the time you get to KVK Season 4 and beyond would be a true feat of strength. I mean, you'd have to be wailing so freaking hard, and I know there are people that do it, but I think that when we talk about priorities for early game commanders, really any other commander you get from Mightiest Governor or from the Wheel of Fortune would be a higher priority than Ragnar Lodbrok in my eyes. And I don't think there's a world in which mixed troop rallies are viable for long enough for him to even really be particularly relevant in the early game. I mean, if you had like a 5-5-1-1 Ragnar in the first couple weeks of a server's life and you were swarming cities in the open field, then I'd say, hey, okay, you're getting some value from your Ragnar, I guess. But I wouldn't put Universal Legendary Commander Sculptures into him. I certainly can't recommend it. And unfortunately, because of his kit, he's not someone that has utility like Julius Caesar does when you get to the end game. Let me explain that for a minute. Julius Caesar has 10% march speed on his museum buff, and he has 5% more troop capacity. So in Ark of Osiris League end game gameplay, you'll see that they'll bring Julius Caesar with like double C primary to try to fill buildings, okay? So they'll bring lots of extra troops because you get the extra troop capacity from Julius Caesar. But you get less troop capacity and you get less march speed on Ragnar. So you really only needed like 1 commander for that operation. And even then, you could find 2 commanders that have 15% troop capacity, then you'd probably use those. And, you could use Freddy for that as an example. So in the early game, and, here's the extra troop capacity on Freddy, by the way. So there are other commanders you'd use for that utility operation. So in the early game, if you're countering Richard I in the open field, and, you happen to have a 5-5-1-1 Ragnar, you could run around with this guy, and then you get a pretty good time. And maybe they'll release commanders sometime down the road where I'd say, man, Ragnar Lodbrok is just really amazing. But I think right now, the primary value of having a bunch of skills on Ragnar is that the developers have said they're going to add more ways to put the skills from old commanders onto new commanders. And so at some point, if Ragnar's skills become relevant for that, then, hey, you'll get some value from your Ragnar. I will say even then, unfortunately, these 3 skills are a little bit weak. 20% attack and 40% healing reduction is okay. 10% damage to cities only is okay. 10% troop capacity is kind of cool, but there are a lot more powerful skills, and I think that's where Ragnar kind of falls down. Yes, his active skill does something really cool, but due to him being a leadership commander, it's harder to really break this because you don't really want to use him as the primary because most people don't have the crit leadership gear. Now, if you did have the crit leadership gear and you had all cavalry, you could pair with like Joan of Arc Prime's secondary or Nevsky's secondary when you get to Season of Conquest, and that could be pretty cool. In the early game, who would I pair with Ragnar? I would say probably someone like Sun Tzu would be really ideal. Sun Tzu is probably one of the best epic pairs you could do with Ragnar because Sun Tzu is doing AoE damage. If you were bringing mostly infantry, you get a lot of benefit, but even if you bring other troop types, he's reducing your damage taken even further, which is cool. And because neither the skills nor the talents on Ragnar generate rage, then guess what, baby? Sun Tzu generating rage when he does damage is really amazing. So I think this pairing is better than meets the eye, even even though you lose out a little bit on ever-changing tactics value because Ragnar's not doing any skill damage. The other consideration if you were pairing with an epic is you could look at a commander like Pelagius. Pelagius generates 100 rage. Man, do you really want that if you use a Ragnar primary? Okay, if you had Ragnar primary, you generate some extra rage from Pelagius because he's, you got the attack tree on Ragnar. You're not really generating rage. This would be really a solid combo. But for the most part, I think you got to use Ragnar as the secondary. And if you're using Ragnar as the secondary, it'll be pretty tricky to have enough rage running in order to get his skill to still be active by the time the primary commander uses their skill yet again for the next skill cycle. The only thing that you could really do to make that happen more consistently is if you're running a Joan of Arc. But now, this is a lot of reaching and work to try to get Ragnar to work when there are plenty of other commanders that I think do great. As far as some other gold key commanders I would prioritize first that have value in the end game, you're looking at commanders like Mehmed, having a lot of value in the end game. Also, I mean, if you wanted to pick an archer that would actually be really good in the early game and probably doesn't hold much value in the end game, but just really, really strong in the early game, I'd pick Thutmose over Ragnar pretty much any day of the week, and then you pair with Esong, then man, Thutmose with Esong seems like a great pairing in the early game. So there are other early game commanders I'm more hyped about. Leave your thoughts down below if there's anything else I missed. And if you're looking for more information about Julius Caesar and when I tested him, I'll have a card in the end screen right over here in just a second. Or if you're looking for more information about early game commanders and their viability and late game commanders, I'll have my tier list in the end screen in just a second as well.